You're listening to the Simply Strategic Ministry podcast. Our goal is to help you grow your ministry through simple strategies and scalable systems. With over a decade of ministry experience, we know that these strategies and systems will bring value to you as a leader and to your entire team.
Well, hey, welcome to another episode of the Simply Strategic Ministry podcast. Joined today with the man himself, Lando.
What's up? I am ready.
It's been a minute since we've recorded.
Yeah, man, it has.
Yeah, you got your coffee?
I got my coffee. I'm ready to rock today. I'm just chilling in the home office and haven't been on the actual podcast to do a real conversation since the first one. So I'm excited to do it again.
Yeah, preaching in AI, which, got a lot of fun feedback.
Absolutely, always. And now everybody's starting to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
And now everyone's on board.
Yeah. Now it's like, yeah, I remember 2022 as well. So, that's cool.
But you're a new basement home office because you're in a new season, and It's official now, so we can talk about it out loud.
Yep.
What are you doing?
Man, I am. I'm excited. I've been a student pastor, basically a family pastor, next gen pastor, and big creative pastor. And so I've been in ministry for about the last decade, and now I'm excited to be doing what God's really put in my heart since I was 16 years old, which was to plant a church. And so we're excited. We're partnered up with a really great group of churches here in Knoxville, and are looking forward to planting here in Knox County. And so we moved, and we have launched publicly, and starting some Bible studies and just trying to do some of the groundwork here and see what God will do with us as we've stepped out to do it. So we're excited.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome. And I remember we've been talking about this forever. What would it look like, if you were going to plant a church? And I've seen some version of the LC prospectus, I feel like 3 different times in different cities.
That's my
and all this
soundboard.
But
so
it's
I'm always just bouncing ideas off of him. So I actually believe there is no better person for me to whiteboard with than Patrick, and I think he feels the same as well. Like, you put us with a whiteboard together, and we're gonna come up with something.
Yeah, dangerous things happen. Things happen. So, well, hey, so in this, here's what I want to do. I want to jump right into it today. This isn't really an interview, and it's not really a live coaching call. No. We talked the other day, and we wanted to make a private conversation public. And I hope it'll be helpful for a lot of y'all. But we were on the phone, we were talking, and just kind of like recapping, hey, as you're in this church planning thing and looking back, just at leadership. And I know that gets thrown around all the time, but really, I think we were talking about the genesis of leadership. And by that, I mean, like when a young person comes out of whatever schooling or education background that they're in, and then they're thrown into ministry.
Yeah.
Like, what does that look like in that stage of life? But also looking at that, even through the lens of our personal experiences, is that long-term healthy or long-term unhealthy? And really the idea that I want to dive in today and talk about is a healthy leadership system. Mm-hmm. And by that, I mean a systemic approach to leadership that is healthy and produces longevity. Because we've seen through the COVID years and everything out of that, all these leaders fall, and leaders have been falling forever. Mm-hmm. But even as our secular workplace and pace grows and just really doesn't look a lot like the Bible, the question is, man, what is a healthy leadership system that's going to last and outlast this world and really lead the church to health and flourishing?
Yeah. So I guess if we're going to kind of go there, we probably need to back up to the start because, and Patrick, I'm sure you would agree with me here on this, is that Pat and I both, as student pastors, we love to give students who are experiencing a call to ministry reps. We don't want it, anytime we've created a student ministry, we've really tried to create it as a student ministry that is for students and led by students. So but that creates a tension as well. And the tension can be really hard to navigate. And I'm sure, a lot of the conversations go like this, like, hey, wouldn't it be awesome if we had a high school student serving with a middle school small group? Okay. And so everybody around the table is like, wow, that sounds like a really great idea. And it is a great idea because middle school students get to be around high school students. That creates a pour into culture. But then there's the tension. And the tension is, okay, what if that conflicts with them, going to their group? And then, or you could do it like, hey, this person wants to be an audio engineer one day and they're 15 years old and they just crave being in the booth, but pulling them in the booth pulls them away from their small group. And so I'm a product of that. And I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing. I'm saying it's like a tension point here. Because here's kind of the story for me is, I jump into ministry and, I say this, I got saved when I was 15 years old and quickly experienced a call to ministry. And a lot of people don't have people who are like pouring into their life at that point in time, but I did, which was great. And I had some great mentors. I had some great mentors who were my student pastors, had the middle school pastor and the high school pastor, who both really deeply invested in me, and actually did care about me, but nonetheless, like, I was able to jump in and start ministering very quickly, and quickly my identity went from like I'm no longer a student, but I'm a student leader, and that creates a whole like gamut of different issues. And not that those issues are bad, and not those issues aren't like, they're not inherently like good or bad. I just think that they're issues that you got to navigate. So like, for example, dude, I went to a private Christian school, and the first time I got up to preach in front of our school, I was about 16 years old, and I'm still a new believer at this point. So, and I got another story I want to share about that here in a little bit, but like, I'm still a new believer at this point, and I get up there to preach in front of, a few hundred people. And I was never really good at football. I was never good at basketball. I was never really good at anything. Exceptional. I wasn't exceptional in school. All the girls didn't like me. Here's my resume. But when I got up there and preached, I did a good job. And I remember walking in to my high school lunchroom and people standing up and clapping for me. Now, in the most pure sense of the word, they're not trying to change my identity. They're just applauding, hey, good job, man. Like, it's very, very pure. It's innocent. But at that point in time, I am now creating like a literal neuro pathway here that I have no value outside of what I can bring to the stage. And because I wasn't good at anything, but now I found my thing. Like, now this is my niche. This is what I'm good at. And and everybody applauded me for essentially my performance in a way. And that created a lot of havoc in my life, and still creates havoc in my life in a lot of ways. And so I think there's that tension there. And that's just kind of a story to illustrate that. I don't know if you feel that too.
Yeah. I mean, I think you get that early exposure, right? Like, so same for me. Like, I vividly know that I was just called to ministry at 15. And when you're called to ministry in a student ministry, it's like blood in the water, know? It's like the student pastor and the leaders descend and they're like, finally, we got one, and I'm the same way. I mean, it's, so a little bit tongue in cheek here, but you start getting all these opportunities inside of a discipleship stage that maybe you're not ready for.
Yeah.
And what you get exposed to, and even what I got exposed to, like, I remember the first time that I got to lead like a group Bible study. Dude, I had no idea what I was doing. and I don't want to hate on that, because I think, the rep is the only thing that kind of gets you in it and gets you growing. But at a young age, I too felt when I crush this, people love me.
Yeah.
And then when I
It's really damaging.
preach, people are like, oh, there's Pat. He's not just the guy in the student ministry. He's the student who preaches, you know? And to be honest, my private world wasn't in line with my public ministry.
Big
So
time.
right out of the gate in high school, I'm already upside down.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, you get a taste of that, and it becomes, can I say addicting? Is that too strong? It becomes like
It is.
exactly
you're
what
addicted
you
to the
just said. Like
dopamine now.
I feel love.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, to me, to get a little theological with it, what you experienced in that lunchroom and what I experienced, maybe on a smaller scale, just in my 100-person student ministry I grew up in, was worship.
Yeah.
People are worshiping you.
Yeah.
They're giving you honor and praise and adoration. And that's the same thing that caused Satan to fall. That he looked at the throne of God and said, I would like to ascend and be like God and receive the worship. And so I just don't think, and there's been tons of content on this, we don't need to run this into the ground. I just don't think the human heart was created to receive worship. It was created to give worship. So to me, the system is unhealthy, because we're exposing these young men and women who are called to ministry to an opportunity to be worshiped when their egos and their maturity cannot handle it.
Yeah.
And what we're doing, I know you're the king of hot takes, but let me say this. I think we're creating addicts. We're trying to do right by them. We're trying to get students to put work in ministry into our ministry so it can be a highlight, so it can be for their development. But I'm afraid in the process that what we're doing is we're creating glory addicts.
Yeah.
Jeez, and what we're teaching them to love is the praise of, man, that was so good, oh wow, that sermon that changed my life, or I've never heard anyone explain that verse that way, all those things.
Let's talk about that.
And
you just said it
detrimental to leaders.
You just said it like, that sermon changed my life. Okay. I hear that now, and I still get ego. And I mean, think about 16-year-old who you've just thrown in there to lead the Bible study. And I'm not saying don't throw them in there to lead the Bible study, but I'm just saying that there's got to be some sort of system in place to where you're actually crafting the inner life before you're crafting what happens on the outer life on the stage. So and then you apply social media into this world to where you immediately have a stage bigger than anybody's youth group that you can be discovered on. And then there's this potential of, you could be viral. You could be the next whoever. You could be the next guy who's leading the college and young adult ministry, whoever the who's who is on Reels these days. And you're actually believing the same lie you believed in the garden, that is, you can be like God. And so I'm looking at myself, I'm getting up there and preaching, and I'm getting up there and doing my best. And I have, I never have completely pure motives, because my heart is deceitfully wicked, and who can know it? But there's a piece of me that really does want to honor God, but there's another piece of me that's still just not yet formed into his image. And so you throw me up on stage while I'm still watching porn on Thursday night. There's something here to where you got to protect not only your stage, but you also got to protect that person, because you haven't been formed yet deeply enough in order to be able to experience the attacks that are about to come your way. I tell our students this all the time. Any student I ever put up on the stage, I say, hey, man, I just want to prepare you. You are about to receive some sort of frustration or criticism or feedback, or the enemy is going to just straight up attack you. And I can vividly remember looking at a list of the students we had share at an event where they were giving the gospel presentation. And I looked at the list of the last, 3 to 4 years we had done this event, and like 20% of them were not, or were still following the Lord. Like the enemy had picked off the rest of them. And dude, that's a problem. And we got to figure that out. And healthy leaders build healthy systems, but healthy systems also build healthy leaders as well. And something ain't working.
Yeah, and I just think that system, like, if we're talking about the genesis of the leader, to go back to the beginning here, okay, that maybe that called to ministry in student ministry, and so you come up and how you're resourced. The system that isn't healthy is the one that platforms them way too soon.
Yeah, 100%.
Way too soon.
Yeah.
And you think about, just think about the life of Jesus. And I know everyone listening probably has heard this, but like, just consider it in the context of this conversation. Like, Christ himself was formed for 30 years, and then starts a public ministry. And it's like, okay, like, look at the timeline, like how much formation time are we giving these young people and how much platform time are we giving them? And where you find the imbalance is probably on the wrong side of that equation 99% of the time.
Yeah.
And so do I think you need to platform students? Yeah, 100%. I do. I think you need to, but I think that there's got to be a better way than the way that we're doing it now. Because let's say, okay, you're called to ministry. In student ministry, you get some platform time. Maybe you're becoming a glory addict. And maybe you're the 20% that makes it through. Satan has a plan to steal, kill, and destroy. He's attacking, but they make it through. And then you survive this weird culture we're in now of like, college. Do I have to go? Do I just go to a residency program, wherever? But you get out of that, whatever that is, either college or residency. And now you're working full time in the church, and you're maybe 20, 21, 22.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Now we're really in a sticky situation.
Yeah. And honestly, most of the guys I've
watched,
you're
young.
Yeah, go ahead. You said we're young.
I'm saying you're young. You're young. You have little to no experience. And the moment you're thrown in to be the guy or to be the girl, it's all on you. And now you're not just a glory addict. You're feeling something that you've not felt up until this point, and that is the pressure to perform. And your formation up until this point, let's assume, isn't that deep. And now we have a crisis on our hand where we have young leaders in charge of young disciples who aren't necessarily deeply formed, are probably addicted a little bit to glory stealing from the Lord, and are 9 times out of 10 more focused on how to grow the ministry through their giftedness than partner with God to watch him build his church.
Yeah,
and is that not a recipe for disaster?
It is. And, as we're thinking about the kind of the next phase of progression, as we're kind of working through this genesis of the leader type idea is, so I think when you jump into ministry, and, when I say ministry, I mean, you jump into paid vocational ministry, and there is such a pressure to grow and perform. And like, we love growth. We're not against growth. I think you can define growth in many different ways. It doesn't always have to be attendance growth. It can be, when we say growth, we're talking about fruit. We're not talking about you just merely growing your metrics. But, but when you jump in there,
market increase.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you look at, you jump into a culture and you probably don't have a boss who's telling you, hey, you need to grow your student ministry by 15% this year. You might have that, And that might be coming from a really healthy place. But I know one church that, they basically gave you raises. And this is a very well-known church in Tennessee. They give you raises based upon your baptism numbers. Let's think about that for a second. If I get up on stage and I manipulate the crowd with music and with emotion, I'm going to get a raise. Let's talk about how freaking unhealthy that is. Let's talk about the pastoral negligence that is. Let's talk about how you are creating the god of mammon to rule your stage. I mean, that is something that is actually happening. And so I just think that we have to step back and evaluate, because you do want to give, you do want to, like, when we're thinking about the system, you do want to give raises based upon, yes, cost of living. Yes, you do want to give merit raises as well, because you do want the people who are working hard, you do want the people who are working hard, and those who are, especially those who are laboring and preaching and teaching, to receive compensation for that. That's a good thing. But you can't create a culture to where you are tying your financial worth to a metric that doesn't always represent fruitfulness. It can just represent metric growth. Like, Mark Driscoll used to say, and I know you can't quote him anymore, but Mark Driscoll used to say, he said, if you want a crowd, you can start a fight. Anybody can get a crowd. That's an unhealthy system. That's a system that we cannot use. And then I think, and most youth pastors aren't setting salaries, but what you are doing? You are giving, the things that okay, let me try to phrase this the right way. You may not be giving somebody a salary raise based upon their metric increase in their performance, but you are giving more opportunity. You are giving a greater openness to your inner circle, and you are publicly celebrating and platforming more those same types of people who may not be fruitful. They may just be growing the ministry in a metric. And I think, though we may not be increasing their salary, and we can say, oh, we would never do that like that big old mega church, but we would do that with how we're platforming, how we're celebrating, and how we're inviting people in closer. And so I think what we have to go back to is, the goal, and Tim Keller really says this in Center Church. He said, the goal is not some sort of metric growth, and the goal is also not just some blanket, just be faithful. The goal is fruitfulness. And we have to, as leaders, holistically look at the fruit of somebody's ministry, whether that is one-on-one discipleship, or whether that is, you're caring for people well. And I think that has to guide whether we think that this person is doing a good job and should, receive, whether it's merit increases or should, receive further leadership in the church. It can't just be metrics. And I think that's where we get off track.
Yeah, and inside of that, let me paint this scenario that goes with this whole glory stealer idea here. Is you get that young adult, young leader vocationally in the church paid, and they have been taught now how to love the praise, but now they're not just receiving it from the people. They still have that opportunity. Now they have the opportunity to receive that from leadership.
Yeah.
Right. And so you use your gift, you grow the ministry, and you're winning in whatever metric that your leadership says, hey, this is the metric, and you get that praise and you feel alive, right?
Yeah.
And then when you're not hitting that metric, you feel what? You feel dead.
Like failure.
You feel worthless.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, here, I just want to be transparent. Last year, I'm backstage. I'm about to preach. I'm the primary communicator of our ministry. So I'm preaching almost every Wednesday, trying to hand that off now. I'm getting ready to come out to preach, and it's a low night, and I come around the backstage curtain, and I see the crowd, and I see how empty it is. And immediately I'm like, gosh, dude, I am so much less hype and excited to preach this sermon right now. And literally in that moment, I felt like, some of those times you just hear God's voice. I literally, as I'm going out, like walking out to the podium, God just goes, you don't want to preach, you want to perform. Because if the level of the crowd in the room changes how excited you are to do the ministry, you're not called to do the ministry. You've mixed it up somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we've all felt that, though. And where does that feeling come from? It comes from somewhere along the way. The system taught us to love the glory.
Mm-hmm.
And when the glory's low, we're not as motivated.
Yeah. And think about this too. Whatever brings you the most anxiety in ministry is often the thing that is driving you. So what I mean by this is, and this is like disordered desires, not like godly desires, but like if your attendance is what's making you anxious, and I've been there, the attendance made me anxious. If that's making you anxious, then that should be a trigger to say something isn't right in the way I've been forming my ministry heart. If pleasing your senior pastor is the thing that makes you the most anxious, and I feel like we could talk about this for a little bit. If pleasing your senior pastor is making you anxious, then there's something deformed in your ministry heart. So I think as leaders of really trying to, when you feel anxiety, and we know from talking to all kinds of leaders that leaders feel anxiety, the goal in that moment is not to work harder. The goal of that moment is not to perform better. The goal of that moment isn't even to build better systems. And we talk about systems all the time. The goal of that moment is to be curious and ask ourselves, why am I experiencing this anxiety? And in that moment, when we're curious, we're not shaming ourselves, we're not angry at ourselves, we're not punching the wall, but we're being curious and asking ourselves, why am I experiencing this anxiety? And what is this telling me about my not yet fully formed to the image of Christ Jesus heart in ministry? And then after we're able to address that, we need to say, okay, what systems are perpetuating this forming of my heart into this deformed way? Because healthy leaders build healthy systems, but the opposite is true. Unhealthy systems build unhealthy leaders. And there's something in the system, whether it's a system that's been put on you, or whether it's a system that you've created yourself, or whether it's even your family system that you've grown up in, that is, you have all these meta narratives throughout your life from your dysfunctional family systems. What's driving that? And I think if we would teach leaders to figure out that part first before they figured out how to grow the ministry and how to have the big event that most of the students aren't even going to remember in 10 years, well, then we might not have as many people quit ministry and hate the church one day. That's what's been on my heart right now.
Yeah. Well, I think the other side of that is true. I think on a really big night, where everything goes great and you're feeling this overwhelming sense of elation and almost a euphoric high, you should also be curious.
Yeah, that's good.
I don't think he'd mind me sharing this, but I won't share his name. Trying to think of how to tell this story. A guy that I lead was experiencing some frustration and some anxiety because things were low. And I said, hey, let me ask you a question. When it's a massive night and like 15 kids respond in the room, do you take all the credit for that, or do you say that it was God? And he's like, well, I say, obviously it's God. And I go, okay, well, if you don't take all the credit, why are you trying to sit in a place where you take all the blame? And the idea that I was trying to get at there is we've all done the ministry events where we did everything that we could and the attendance just sucked. And we've all done the events that we pulled off by the seat of our pants and a bunch of people came.
Yeah.
And I think the more and more that I do ministry, the more I realize it's almost like the Bible is true when Paul says that it's God that brings the growth.
Yes. And this
And
is
so
what
when
doesn't
we,
make
so
sense.
when we,
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, so when we lament the low night, on some level, we're taking on this is all my fault.
Yeah.
And then if we have the high night, we're not always in the place of holiness to say, oh no, this was all completely God. No, what are we thinking? Man, I crushed those text lists. I blew it up on campus ministry. Like I did all these things right. And I created and produced these nights. And if I created and produced these nights, then I can do it again. And I can do it again. And I can do it again. I can do it again. I can do it again. And I'm only as good as the big nights that I stack up.
And I'm believing the lie that I can be like God and bring the growth whenever I want. If
That's right.
And I think as we think about growth, remember, when in our modern context, we don't have the same view of growth, specifically agrarian growth, that they had in the New Testament. So when Jesus says, when he's talking about, the growth of the church, or, pray for the harvest and all these different kind of agrarian concepts, in our world, if we want growth in our crops, what do? Well, we have an irrigation system. We can have greenhouses to control the atmosphere. We can, there's all these different processes to make sure the soil is fresh and renewed. And then we plant the seeds and things grow. Like we've figured this out. We have fertilizers. We have all these different things to make sure things grow. Well, when they're talking about agrarian concepts in the New Testament, growth is, all right, all I can really do is plant the seed. I can't control the rain. I can't really control the soil. And I can't, control anything else. Like I don't have an irrigation system. So all I really can do is plant the seed. And so I think when we talk about systems, we gotta really check ourselves, as you and I, Pat, and that when we say, hey, we want to help you grow your ministry through simple strategy and scalable systems, we cannot produce growth. There's nothing we can do to produce growth.
That's right.
But what we're talking about is really, hey, we want to help you think about a system to plant the seeds. And then if you're not trusting in God and you're not praying that God would bring the rain, nothing's going to move in your ministry. And I think too often we can say, hey, if you pragmatically follow these steps, X, Y, and Z will happen. And that is just a lie. You can follow all the right steps and things may never move. And you can follow all the right steps and things move in all the ways you wanted, and you still be a failure in God's eyes because you didn't do it with a heart
that's right.
that wanted him. And so I think that's kind of the tension of being practical, right? Is we're very practical guys. Like our whole coaching business is around practical strategies. But at the end of the day, there's no strategy that works without the Spirit breathing on it. And you as the leader have to do the inner work, do the formational pieces that are going to help you be someone who's fully dependent upon the Spirit's work in your ministry, in your life. And we need to be careful with the young people in our ministries and the newer leaders to make sure we focus on that piece probably more than the strategy. We're looking for faithful and able. There's an order there.
And you're right. And the reason we need to do that is because if it does grow and if it does explode, guess what? And I'm not hating on any particular culture here. I want to make an observation. If it does grow and if it does explode, more than you're celebrated, you're going to be expected to scale it and keep it going.
Yeah.
And so the danger there is, how long can you do that? I didn't tell you about this, but I got a text from a guy a couple days ago, and I need to respond. I'm down with the flu. That's why I sound like death. But dude, it was like a cry for help. His ministry is big. It really is. And he texted me and said, man, I got to get on the phone with you about some systems, because if something doesn't change, I can't do this much longer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what is that? So for some of you who are like, man, if my student ministry just exploded, or if I just, this or whatever, I'm telling you, there are guys with ministries triple the size of yours that I'm on the phone with that are begging of like, how do I make this stop? Or how do I deal with it? Because through really hard work, or through just the grind, or through some, big event that then it just took off, or whatever, or maybe even God supplied us with something, I don't know how to keep that going.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you get into a dangerous spot of, okay, maybe at one point you were a glory addict, but now you're not addicted to the glory. You're burning at both ends just to keep up with the thing that you created.
Yeah. I think a great question, and I've heard this in the context of business, but is your ministry a playground for you to have fun doing God's will and his work, or is it your prison? Because a lot of people have set up their ministries to be the prison that is actually kind of the whip against their back, if you will. It's the thing that is driving you in an unhealthy way, as opposed to like, hey, I'm just here to do what God's called me to do, and I'm going to have a lot of stinking fun doing it. And I think we set ourselves up like that when we say, hey, we're going to grow. We're going to grow, and it's not, and it's like, okay, I hope you do grow. And I think if you're doing some of the right things that God's called you to do, you will experience some growth. But I also think that when your growth has to look like a certain metric in order for you to think that this is a successful, faithful ministry, then you're creating a prison for yourself. So, for example, I think that churches have structured themselves more like a American stock market than a biblical Acts 2 church. What I mean by that is, if you have to keep your quarterly projections and your quarterly earnings up and to the right, quarter after quarter, in a few narrow metrics, then you are creating something that is built to fail. So, for example, you take on millions of dollars in debt that is only going to be paid if you get up and to the right, quarter after quarter, through budgets and butts and seats and all the the B's of ministry. If you do that, you've created a prison that's going to kill you. It's going to strangle out the life that God has put in you. If I remember that Pat and I, when we served together, I love numbers. I love goals. I think it is a very motivating thing to have a goal. But man, I wanted to grow our student ministry to 1,000 students and volunteers on a Wednesday night. And in order to do that, we had to grow by X amount of numbers every single, year. And I'm telling you, year 3 into that, when we're like, what the heck? We want to do this in 5 years. Whereas everybody, I felt like an idiot. And I quietly forgot about that vision. And guess what? When I forgot about the vision, when I actually wasn't, making it my God, things started to grow. And we actually got there. But I had to release something that became this prison, this idol, this thing that was deforming me. And when I did, well, then God wanted to grow the ministry. But I couldn't. You can't grow while you're holding on to your idol, right? So,
yeah. And I feel like that system also just produces a different view of what success in ministry is. And I don't want to get lost in the weeds on this, because it could be, semantics and all the other stuff. But I mean, just think about it. If what success in ministry is, gosh, can I say this? almost everybody that I've coached, and even guys I talk to, let's be honest, success in ministry is more attendance. There are more people here this week than were here year to date last week. And a lot of what is success in the church can be pulled off without God. And so when that is the win, well, how I spend money changes. What I preach about changes. How I do my events changes. And I think just as much as you could be a glory addict, I feel like I know there are people listening to this podcast now where you're at in ministry because of the unhealthy leadership system that you've created for yourself or you exist in, is you're doing a lot of good growth things and God is not in the process. And you're just pulling it off by the power of your giftedness. And in the giftedness that God has given you, you've actually been taught to trust in more than the God who gave it to you. And on top of that, you've now created your identity around the giftedness because it brings the growth. And that's what you're that's your perpetual cycle. And that's not going to last. And so there can't be this system. So I texted you this the other day. We were talking about it. I'm not a big fan of tearing something down unless you have ideas about what could stand in its place.
Yeah.
And so there is this in the genesis of the leader, the young leader called to ministry, brought up in a student ministry, then educated, which, dude, that could be a whole other podcast. I'm not like the biggest fan of college, but some of these young people are being dumped into the church with leadership over young people that don't know how to handle the Bible. They're really good at systems and process, which again, I get it. The irony is we're systems and processes guys, but they're really good at growth, systems, and processes, but they can't handle the word.
I would say a lot of them too would even be they're great relationally and they're great on stage, and they don't know how to handle the word, and they don't know how to handle their own spouse and their marriage and their private life. Like when you look at how many student pastors
and all the things, yeah.
When you look at how many student pastors still watch porn, it's actually like I'll go here for a second. It's actually wild to me. Like when you are committing the sin of porneia and you're in ministry, it's like, okay, I get it. I get it. Some people, we fail. We all are going to fail in a certain way. But like, where did that slip through in like formationally? Like how is this happening? But you're right. We can't just, we got to figure out where's the system. What are we rebuilding in its place?
Yeah. And so here's my thesis or hypothesis or whatever. I don't know. I'm not smart. Here's my idea.
Your preamble.
Yeah. My filibuster. Okay. Here's my idea. My idea is, dude, okay, there has to be a resurgence of the church as the academy. And alongside with that, there has to be a resident system that's more than you pay me to go to school here so that way I can work you and get cheap labor.
Has that happened before?
I said it. I think a few times.
Yeah.
So here's what I mean by that. Okay. I think the church as the academy, that's not an original idea to me. I heard that from JMC, but it's this idea that,
John
before
MacArthur,
the universities and the conventions, John MacArthur, John Mark Comer, that the church used to be the academy itself for the theological training and equipping. And I think right now the church is the academy for ministry. but I don't know if the church is the academy for like the deeply formed life in ministry. And so I think the church has to be, you have to have both your leadership track system for called to ministry men and women has to have some sort of formational piece that I'm suggesting needs to be expanded to be even more than the practical ministry piece.
Yes. So for example, my new role right now, is a church planner. Okay. In my previous role, for the last 9 years, I have not had really any coaching, any therapy, any like intentional formation that has existed outside of like the daily rhythms of staff. And those were good. Like I'm not saying that wasn't intentional, but what I'm saying is the culture I'm in. Here's the first thing they say to me. They said, Landon, you have no pressure to plant this church. We're going to pay you for 3 years. Okay. If you want to take the first several months and just take a break, go ahead. And here's what we're going to give you as well. We're going to give you a pastor who's been a lead pastor for 22 years, and he's going to pour into your life. We're also going to give you an emotional health coach. We're also going to give you a spiritual director. We're also going to give you a licensed counselor to talk to your marriage. And we're also going to give your wife a counselor for free. So here's the thing. For years, I wanted a coach. And oftentimes, spending money on those things is not as important as spending money on whatever the next building program is, or whatever the next thing you're about to go to debt in, or whatever the next,
you can drop
event
$800 on a 9 square.
Yeah, freaking 9 square in there. It's a bunch of PVC pipe. While student pastors are still struggling with watching pornography and don't know how to treat their wife yet. And their wives are crying out like, hey, we want help. And we don't have anybody to talk to here at the church, because if I share what's really going on, that actually is a risk if I share what's really going on, that's actually a risk to my spouse's performance. Thus, we might be seen differently. Like, we got to crush that.
It's a risk to my job.
We get into coaching, because we're talking to people who I'm like, listen, you have nobody to talk to right now. And I'm like, yeah, repurpose some of your conference budget. Let's not go to Drive this year. Let's stay away from whatever the next big conference is. That is great for team building, but why don't you have somebody to talk to that doesn't really know your pastor or your elders or your leadership structure, and can just like help you as the leader think through things differently? Like 10 years in ministry and no one's ever intentionally coaching you. What the heck? That is negligent. And you as the leader have to make sure that does not happen to the next 20-year-old who jumps into your ministry. Because if not, you are going to be partially responsible for some of the deformed ways that they get brought up in and begin to become. You got to fix that. That's the system. Yeah. We're not just burning something down, but okay, invest in coaching for your team. You can't do it. You're their boss. You can coach them a little bit, but you're still their boss. You can't sit in that seat. You can't be their boss and their spiritual father. That doesn't happen. You can't share those same seats at the same time. You got to fix that. As you can see, I'm a little passionate about that.
And it's almost like the rabbis had something figured out. Like part of it was like, Jesus said, hey, come and follow me. Like you need the mentor. You really do. Mm-hmm. You need the older, wiser person to walk slowly with you and to sometimes say, hey, all I want you to do is watch what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And then to sometimes say, hey, I want you to give it a shot. And then to release you for it and say, hey, I think you've got this, but come back if you have issues.
Yeah.
And
sure.
instead, I think we're already long, but I want to touch on this. I think we're suffering from a system that's trying to look more like the corporate American work system than what a system of work should be in the church. And you kind of went off on this the other day on the phone, and we've heard personally, and we hear so much of like, that, hey, well, our people are working hard and our people are doing, whatever, and they're working the late hours, they're not, whatever. And your comment to me was, as I was talking about some of this, about a coaching thing, you said, man, why would we ever go ahead and you make your comment.
All right. Yeah.
Why would we want to
let me
look like the world?
Yeah. Let's wrap this thing up. I feel like we need a part 2 on this whole conversation.
Let
me wrap it up with this. Okay. There is this sentiment in ministry world that says our people are working 40 hours a week plus going to church and doing discipleship and going to small group. And if our people are doing that, then we should be willing to do it. We should be working 60 hours a week. And my question is when did American work culture become the thing that sets our spiritual rhythms? Like, we are called to be the people who are set apart. And our people have idols. And we can't take on their idols in order to somehow meet them where they're at or create something for them or minister to them. We have to follow the rhythms of Jesus, not the rhythms of American corporate culture. Because everybody who's quit their job and in a year remembers and knows that corporate culture didn't care about me. They cared about what I could provide. And we can't model our rhythms as a team after something that is severely deformed, which is the God of mammon. Our American culture loves money.
Yeah. And I would also think, well, let's look at our people and let's look at their lives. Are they healthy?
Mm-hmm.
Like, does that work approach lead to health in their marriages? No, we're in all the counseling appointments. We're in all the, like we know that they're tired and burnout and exhausted and working for greed and promotion and all the other things. And we all know that they're lamenting the days of the COVID pace to where they could work from home and where they, could have, some more margin or whatever, and how they want those back and all this other stuff. Yeah. Or we see, the careerism, the addicted person to the power and the platform and everything. And so maybe that's not a good system to build on. So I agree with you. This needs a part 2. I think we've thoroughly eviscerated.
Matt Chandler, he says it all the time. He's like, how's that working for you? And it's like, hey, you have high turnover on your staff. Oh, and your student pastors' marriages are struggling. Oh, and people feel undervalued and don't feel like they're getting paid for what they're being asked to do. And your staff's frustrated. And the question is, how's that working for you? Probably want to change your system.
Yeah. Well, I think we definitely need a part 2 of what that system might look like to replace it. So verbal commitment for that. You want to do a part 2?
You'll need to reach out to my lawyers. You'll need to reach out to my lawyers for that.
Okay. I know. Big
I'll
church
invoice
planning
you.
guy.
I'll invoice you, Patrick.
Yeah. Hey, go ahead and bill me for this time.
I'll bill you for this. But
right.
yeah, thank you guys for listening, and thank you for letting us be a coaching voice in your life. We really value that.
Yeah. And we'll be looking forward to joining with you again as the conversation continues in part 2. As always, thanks so much for listening to the podcast. Hope it adds value to you and your leadership in your ministry, and we'll see you on the next episode.